from New York, it's That Kevin Show.
See, I knew it.
Come on, Kev. What's a few classified documents between friends?
I told you all the time. I knew it. I knew he had some too.
Here he is, That Kevin. Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back to Times Square in New York. Kevin McCullough, glad to have you with us on That Kevin Show. There's a topic that I have covered, I think, more in depth than any other radio broadcast for sure, and possibly TV in the last 3 years. And that is the ongoing attack against your daughters and mine in public spaces. And even with the way the electorate responded in 2022, where we threw out 50 of the most progressive school boards across the country, the Biden administration still seems to have no clue as to what the voters actually want. And I've gone so far as to say this here on this show. I believe that this is going to be an unmonitored demographic that's going to come back to haunt them big time in the election. I'm curious to see if my next guest feels the same way. She is the director of the Education Freedom Center at the Independent Women's Forum, and she's also host of the Students Over Systems podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Jenny Gentles. Hello, Jenny.
Hello, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, and thank you for making time to be with us. Am I wrong in the idea that the current administration seems to be completely tone deaf on what moms in particular are wanting to see out of them as it pertains to the gender issue in public?
Well, they're completely captured by activists. And yes, absolutely tone deaf, not just to moms, but the American public in general. This is a very clear issue when it comes to the American people recognizing that there are differences between males and females, men and women. And even the Washington Post reports that the majority of Americans do not believe that people can change gender and be anything different than what they were born, and that is either male or female. But the Biden administration has a different take on this and is trying to socially engineer all aspects of the educational experience and remake society.
Well, and I want to get to what they're doing in a second, but I want to zoom in a little bit more on the science part of it that you were just talking about. In the 3 years that this has been pushed the hardest that I remember in modern times, it seems as though there has been a nonstop, we are going to change it against anything that comes out to the contrary. What has been some of the science that has been, because there's been very interesting findings in the last 3 years while this all-out push has gone on. What are some of those findings?
Well, the science was suppressed for years. And so when you're talking about the last 3 years, a lot of what's coming out is coming from outside the United States because activists captured institutions in many countries, but let's talk about the US. They captured the medical associations, they captured the Endocrine Society, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the science became what the activists said, what they got, what pushed through. And then rather than having evidence base for what they call gender affirming care, which in reality is cutting girls' breasts off if they are uncomfortable in their body, castrating young men if they are uncomfortable in their body. Rather than relying on evidence, they relied on activists. So those captured organizations have poisoned the medical community and have endangered young people. And
we've begun to see in science and on a science basis in other countries that had been more lenient towards this,
yes,
some real change of directions.
That's what's so encouraging right now. I'm sure, Kevin, you feel the same way. As soon as you become aware of what's going on, it's so horrifying that it becomes very upsetting. But we're about to turn the corner, and we should be encouraged by what's happening in other countries. And I'll give one recent example, and that's something called the CAS review that all Americans should become aware of if this is an issue that is of concern to you. And that is a review that was done at the request of the National Health Service in the UK. And it found that the evidence, if it was there, was extremely low for, again, what they call gender affirming care or providing puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and these attempts to change the sex of particularly of young people. And so the UK And other countries are responding to this by putting a stop to it. No more puberty blockers for young people who have this distress in their physical body. No more funding and even legally allowing these things to move forward. So that's the Cass review out of the UK, but it's not just that country. Other Western European countries have also put on the brakes, and they've said, look, either the evidence is low or it's not there, or in the case of Sweden, the adults who have tried to transition and have undergone these surgeries, they actually have a higher suicide rate. So we're going to stop doing this. And it's time for the US to wake up and do the same.
Well, and what we don't talk about a lot is the outflow of what the bad science has done to the kids. We still have not had the manifesto of the Nashville shooter be released, but it's my understanding that that child was struggling with some of these very issues and responding in anger to much of the way that they had been programmed. IWF has done an entire documentary series on detransitioners that are trying to come back from really bad advice and kind of gain control of their life all over again. And some of the subjects of that documentary are also the parents that have had their hearts broken from courts and school districts that have somehow wielded more power than the actual parent. In light of all of this controversy and what appears to be blowback against that thinking, the Biden administration decided to issue an executive action just a little more than a week ago that would permanently change Title IX. Now, there were reasons that I had for questioning Title IX when it was first set up and kind of some of the language that they used around it for a whole host of different reasons. But when it comes to the kind of non-equivocation of making it clear that women deserve a safe space to compete, to grow in athletic ability, and to be able to do the very best of what they can do, I champion it on all of those fronts. What did the Biden administration change granularly in Title IX?
Well, Title IX is a law, so passed by Congress 52 years ago, and it simply opened up opportunities for women broadly, not just women's sports, not just women's collegiate sports. That's often what people think.
That's where you hear the most of it mentioned.
Right,
yes.
right. And that's where there was a very visible change, where suddenly there wasn't just like one women's field hockey team. There were multiple opportunities athletically for women, but also doors opened in all aspects of educational institutions, and probably higher ed, again, was where you saw a lot of it. But Title IX actually impacts every organization, every educational institution that receives federal funding, and says that you may not discriminate by sex. Well, the Biden administration thought, hey, we want to remake society. We're all in on this gender ideology thing. So what we're going to do is not pressure Congress to change the law, because that's would have been the appropriate way to go. We're going to write a 1,600-page regulation changing it ourselves. And we're going to throw out this idea of sex-based protection. And we're going to throw in a whole bunch of other terms and say that institutions receiving federal funding may not discriminate based on, sure, sex, but also sex characteristics. And the thing that we talk a lot about at IWF, gender identity.
We'll come right back from New York. Stay here.